All right, these are going to be the notes for what's called completing the square. This is another way to solve a quadratic equation. So we've done factoring, we've done quadratic formula. Another way, and a lot of people actually find this easier than quadratic formula, is what's called completing the square. Where we left off last time was how to make a perfect square trinomial. So we talked about that last time. If we are given the A and the B, that's the A, that's the B, we are missing the C. To make a perfect square trinomial, you simply take B, divide it by 2, and square it. So in this case, B is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. X squared plus 12x plus 36 is a perfect square trinomial. Why? If you factor it, you would simply get x plus 6 times x plus 6. And again, you can do FOIL to check it, but that is what you would get. You don't have to write it that way. You could simply write it as x plus 6 squared. All right? All right, let's look at the second one. Take B, which is 14, divided by 2, and square it. Well, 14 divided by 2 is 7. What is 7 squared? 49. That's your perfect square. This would break down into x plus 7 times x plus 7, or x plus 7 squared. Why? Because the square root of 49 is 7. What is 7 plus 7? 14. All right, look at number 3. Even if we have a minus here, it does not matter. It's always going to be plus. Take B, which is negative 10, divided by 2, and square it. It will always be positive. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5, but negative 5 squared is a positive 25. This would be factored x minus 5 squared, because negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. Negative 5 plus negative 5 is a negative 10. Even if on the last one you get an odd number, it does not matter. Simply take B and divide it by 2, leave it like that, and then square it. Well, 5 over 2 squared means 5 over 2 times 5 over 2. So I'm running out of room here, but 5 over 2 times 5 over 2 is 25 over 4. That is a perfect square. Okay? Now, these are the steps. I'm going to go through them. So you can always go back and look at this, but this is how we're going to set it up. So, old way would have been quadratic formula. We're going to do it by completing the square. First thing you do on completing the square is you don't have it in standard form. You actually want it to be in the form ax squared plus bx equals c, which means we need to move this minus 16 back over to the right side. Well, you do that by adding 16. So we should get x squared minus 6x equals 16. Next thing we do is build a perfect square on the left side. The way we do that, because technically I'm now missing the c on the left side, is I take b and divide it by 2 and square it. So in this case, b is negative 6, that's the number in front of x, divided by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3, that doesn't even matter. A negative 3 squared, negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. What you need to do is then make the perfect square on the left side by adding 9. But remember, anytime you add something to one side of an equation, you need to add it to the other. I call this BSing. You need to do whatever you did to one side to both sides. You'll hear me abbreviate this BS. If you added 9 to the left side, you need to add it to the right. Now, you can factor this on the left side. Two numbers that when multiply give you a positive 9, but add up to a negative 6. It would be x minus 3 times x minus 3. But a better way to write that would have just been x minus 3 squared. Now, what is 16 plus 9 on the right side? That's 25. Now, this goes back to middle school. How do you get rid of a square, just like with Pythagorean theorem? you have to square root. That's going to get rid of the square. Now you're going to hear me say square root BS. That means both sides. So if I square root the left, I got to square root the right. Well, square root cancels the square, so I got x minus 3 equals, remember with square roots, there's two possible answers. There's a positive 5, because 5 times 5 is 25, but there's also a negative 5. Isn't negative 5 times negative 5 a positive 25? So you're always going to do positive, negative, and whatever that number is. In this case, it is a perfect square. It's 5. Now, all you're doing is solving for x. Well, how do you solve? Get rid of the minus 3. How do you get rid of a minus 3? Just add 3. Well, you're going to add 3 to this side. So if you get all whole numbers or integers, one answer is 3 plus 5. Well, what's 3 plus 5? 3 plus 5 is 8. The other answer should be 3 minus 5. What is 3 minus 5? That should be negative 2. Now, if you get perfect number answers, it means you really could have factored it from the very beginning. We're just showing you that there is another way to solve it. You could have done quadratic formula as well, too. All right? Okay, the next one, I honestly think you can factor this, but we're still going to do completing the square. I think there are two numbers that when multiply give you 21, but add up to 22. But we'll just do completing the square anyways. Eventually, you're not going to be able to factor it. Okay, first step, you got to get C on the other side. How do you do that? Bring it over or subtract 21 from both sides. So that's x squared plus 22x equals, when it goes to the other side, negative 22. Next step, take b divided by 2, square it, and then bs it. That means add it to both sides. You're going to build a perfect square on the right or on the left side. So do 22 divided by 2, square it. 22 divided by 2 is 11. What is 11 squared? 11 times 11 is 121. You need to BS that. Add that to both sides. X squared plus 22x plus 121. That's the left side. But don't forget, you had negative 22 over there on the right side. And that should be, oh, I'm sorry, it's 21, not 22. I knew something wasn't right. That number that I moved over was 21. Sorry. So that should be a negative 21 you had on this side, plus 121. I don't know why I said 22. Okay, this is a perfect square trinomial. If you start to understand that it's got to be xx plus plus and 11 on 11, you don't need to write it. Just write x plus 11 squared. Now, what was a negative 21 and a plus 121? Isn't that 100? How do you get rid of a square? You need to square root both sides. If you square root the left, it cancels the square, but you got to square root the right. All right? All right, square root cancels the square, so it's x plus 11 equals, just be careful, that's a perfect square, but there's two answers. Positive 10 times 10 is 100, and negative 10 times negative 10 is also 100. Last step is to solve for x. How do you get rid of plus 11? Minus 11. So you have two answers again. One answer is negative 11 plus 10. What would negative 11 plus 10 be? That's a negative 1. The other answer is negative 11 minus 10, and that should be a negative 21. Okay? Those are your two possible answers there. All right, take a look at the next one, and again, we're just going to do 2 solid days of 100%. Nothing but just practice here, and then next Monday and Tuesday we'll do more practice. So this is just getting to understand it, and then we'll get more practice in next week as well. Okay, so you can't do completing the square until you move C to the other side. If he was a minus 5 on the left, it's got to be a plus 5 on the right. And actually, this is quicker than quadratic formula. This one, you're not going to get perfect answers. So this would actually be quicker than quadratic formula. All right, next step, I need to build a perfect square on the left. How do I do that? I take b, which is negative 2, divide it by 2, square it, and then add it to both sides. That's BS. Okay, negative 2 divided by 2 is 1, but what's 1 squared? Isn't that just 1? So you need to add 1 to both sides. X squared minus 2x plus 1, that is a perfect square trinomial, equals 5 plus 1. You added 1 to both sides. You can factor it if you want to. Remember, if the sign is a minus then a plus, both of them have to be a minus. How do you get x squared? X and x. What's the only way to get 1? 1 and 1. You can double check it with FOIL if you want to. Has to work. But a better way to have written this would have been x minus 1 squared. How do you get rid of a square? Square root. You got to square root both sides. Now, what's different about this one? 6 is not a perfect square. So I get x minus 1 equals, remember there's two answers here, plus minus 6. Now, how do you get rid of a minus 1? You add 1. The 1 does not go with the radical 6, so your final answer is 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. If you did quadratic formula, it would take you longer, but you'd still get the same answer, okay? All right, and again, that answer right there means there's going to be two solutions. They're just not going to be great numbers. They're going to be irrational numbers, all right? All right, next one, same thing. Looks like most of these you got to get C to the other side. I know we're not used to that, but that's how completing the square goes, because you can't build a perfect square on the left till you get rid of C. So if you bring it to the other side, it's plus 4. All right, I'm going to take b divided by 2 and square it and add that to both sides. So shouldn't that be 10 over 2, which is 5? What is 5 squared? 25. So I got x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals, remember, if you added 25 to the left, whatever you do to the left, you got to do to the right. Okay, I'm not going to write both of these. This would be x plus 5 times x plus 5. I'm just going to write x plus 5 squared. It's the same thing. What's 4 plus 25? That's 29. How do you get rid of a square? You square root it. X plus 5 equals, remember, there's always two solutions here. Positive, negative, square root of 29. How do you get rid of 5? Subtract 5. 5 does not go with the 29 because that's in a radical, so your answer is negative 5 plus or minus square root of 29. If you did quadratic formula, it would take you longer. You should still get the same answer. All right, let's do the next one. I think there's two more. He's got to move. When he goes over, he's a negative 11. Take b and divide it by 2. And square it. 8 divided by 2 is 4. What's 4 squared? 16. What are you going to do to that 16? Add it to both sides. All right. Factor the perfect square on the left. You could write x plus 4 times x plus 4, but then you'd have to just write x plus 4 squared. What's 16 and a negative 11? That should be 5. How do you get rid of a square? You square root it. Whatever you do to the left, you do to the right, so you got to square root that. So I got x plus 4 equals, remember there's two solutions here. Just like in quadratic formula. Didn't the first part of quadratic formula say negative b plus or minus the square root? It's the exact same thing. How do you get rid of the plus 4? Minus 4. 4 does not go with the 5 on the right. So you have two answers. Negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 5. That's it. Okay? And the last one, very similar. Move this over. Well, he was a plus 4 on the left. He better be a minus 4 on the right. B divided by 2, that's 6 divided by 2, and then square it. Wasn't that a negative 6 divided by 2, which is a negative 3? But it doesn't matter. What's negative 3 squared? Negative 3 times negative 3. It's always a plus. Always a plus. X squared minus 6x plus 9 equals, don't forget, you added 9 to the left. You better add 9 to the right. Okay, again, I'm not going to write both of these. If I factored x squared minus 6x plus 9, it'd be x minus 3 times x minus 3. Why not just write x minus 3 squared? Negative 4 and 9 is a 5. How do you get rid of a square? Square root it. Got to do the same thing to both sides. So you get x minus 3 equals, remember, it's really two answers. And how do we get rid of a minus 3? Well, it should just be plus 3. plus 3. So your answer is x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 5. And that is it. Okay?